Well, good morning. This is the day the Lord has made. Let us rejoice and be glad. And I certainly am glad. I'm thrilled to be here with you. Thank you for inviting me. And, you know, sometimes if something is important, in retrospect you look back and you see it was important because before it happens, the devil seems to get in there to delay, to discourage, to dismay, to derail, to deroute. And I'm here without my luggage, in borrowed clothes, thanks to my partner Donna Monday from Hart, US. I'm here without the adapter for my computer. My computer froze as I was doing my last-minute arrangements for this important presentation. So thank you. I'm thrilled to be here with you. Thank you for inviting me back and to share with you a little bit of the pain and the passion, the privilege of helping to make a difference for some of our partners on the front lines of faith and freedom. But for those of you who may not have had the misfortune to meet me before, I'd like to introduce myself, if I may, very briefly and a little bit more modestly than your embarrassing introduction. Because all I ever say about myself is I'm a nurse and a social scientist by intention, and that is what I thought I was doing with my life. Got that strange title of Baroness by astonishment, and it is indeed God's sense of humour. I was not born a Baroness. You become a Baroness by being appointed to the British House of Lords, which is the equivalent of your Senate. And I wasn't into politics. I don't particularly like politics. And I was so much out of that world that I was the first Baroness I'd ever met. Never met one before. And it's quite a thing. You wake up in the morning and there's a Baroness looking at yourself out of the bathroom mirror. And you say to God, well, God, it's a huge privilege being in one of the houses of the British Parliament. How do I use that privilege? And I think the message came to me to be a voice for the voiceless. Parliament is, of course, a wonderful place in which to speak for people who cannot speak for themselves. Whether as a nurse on behalf of vulnerable people in our own society, but increasingly on behalf of forgotten peoples in forgotten lands, so many of them are brothers and sisters suffering persecution around the world. So a privilege to speak in the House of Lords, but a far, far greater privilege to speak in the House of the Lord. So thank you for letting me share that with you this morning. Now, the wonderful miracle workers, I've been surrounded by miracle workers this morning who've made up for all those devils sort of derouting and derailing. And I'd like to thank you so much for helping with the presentation this morning. What I'd like to do is, in a moment, to introduce you, as I've said, to some of the pain and the passion and the privilege of helping to make a difference, which of course is what you are all about here, and it's why it's wonderful to be here and share with you. In ARDF, you are trying, as we do in my small NGO Hart, to fulfill the biblical mandate, to heal the sick, feed the hungry, clothe the naked, speak for the oppressed, whether on our own doorsteps, but as far as we're concerned, in remote places around the world. I love the values that you stand for, and they're ones which we also try to enshrine in my small not-for-profit. Partnership, the Christ-centered values and worldview, leadership, what a privilege to be associated with the wonderful work you do. I do thank you for that. And meeting the needs of development with holistic care. I'd like, if I may this morning, to share with you just some of the examples we have of working with inspirational partners on the front lines of faith and freedom. My small not-for-profit embodies and enshrines many of the values, in fact all the values, which you enshrine in your splendid ministry. We try to provide aid and advocacy, the holistic biblical mandate of speaking for the oppressed and meeting their other needs. Particularly, we focus on those suffering oppression and persecution who are largely neglected by international aid organizations. Now, that situation happens because the big aid organizations, the well-resourced big boys, like the UN, UNHCR, UNICEF, Save the Children, Red Cross, can only go places with the permission of a sovereign government. If a sovereign government is denying access to the big aid organizations to reach those victims, they can't go. They don't go. So those victims are left unreached, unhelped, unheard. So I spend a lot of my time crossing borders illegally and completely shamelessly. That's where it needs to be. That's where we are most wanted. Our fundamental principles, I think, are 100% compatible with all you are doing. I call them the 4 A's. Authenticity, The enormous importance of going in person, as I've just said, even if it means crossing borders illegally, to gather the first-hand evidence of oppression, persecution, and the humanitarian needs. Among those needs in aid, the importance of going in person to be with people, to assess their needs, to ask them their priorities, give them the dignity of choice, and therefore providing the most appropriate type of relief. Advocacy, making known the needs and concerns of those who are suffering. And accountability to those for whom we speak, that our message is accurate and sensitive, and of course accountability to our donors, to those who support our work. And I love the way that you work with local partners. For me, I'd like to see the whole development paradigm go in that direction rather than putting large teams on the ground. Obviously, in an emergency like a tsunami or an earthquake, you need the big teams, the surgical teams, the engineers. But in development, what a privilege to work with local people, helping them make a difference for their own people. This has all sorts of advantages. It maintains their dignity. It avoids upsetting the local economy. Often when the big aid organizations and the NGOs and the UN go in with large salaries, with large teams, they upset the local economy. They upset the local salary structures. They upset the subsistence farmers. They can do a lot of damage. But if you work through the local people, you don't upset the local economy. Working through local partners avoids the aid dependency syndrome. It's a helping hand, not a handout. And we're always humbled by the enormous resourcefulness and resilience of local people helping their own people. It enhances the local leadership and authority relationships. You're not getting in there and taking over. You're just alongside, supporting and facilitating. And what I love most of all, enables us to celebrate their achievements and enables them to take pride in their achievements. And this enhances sustainability and self-respect. So this is why I love your philosophy and ours of working with and through local partners. I'm going to invite you, if you will, to leave this beautiful place in this lovely land and travel and just meet some of our partners on those front lines of faith and freedom. Burma, I've been in Burma twice already this year, and I'm sure you're familiar with the situation in Burma. Myanmar, I know it's technically called, but the local people hate that word. So we always call it Burma in respect to their wishes to call it Burma. And as you will know, the Burmese military junta has used its power to carry out brutal crimes against humanity, particularly against the ethnic national groups, such as the Karen, the Karenni, the Shan, and the Kachin civilians, driving them off their lands in a shoot-to-kill policy. Earlier this year, I was across the border in Shan State, and a ceasefire that had been was broken while we were there with intense fighting. The conflict currently going on in Kachin State is the worst in Burmese history. Constant killings and violations of human rights on a horrendous scale. Come in just for a moment as we do one of our unofficial, illegal cross-border crossings from Thailand into Burma. Dramatically beautiful. You can't help being exhilarated by beauty, but you know you're going into a heart of darkness. Now, I know I've had the pleasure and privilege of meeting many of you before, so I'm going to give updates on some of the countries we may have visited together already. But the killings, the shootings go on with the Burmese army adopting its shoot-to-kill policy and, of course, firing at villages in the jungle. Their wooden buildings and dwellings, they go up like tinder. Everything is destroyed. The Burmese army will destroy any food supplies, nothing left for civilians, destroy the livestock. And hundreds of thousands have been driven from their homes to take what I can only call the long road to nowhere. Where do you go? You have to flee 3 minutes' notice or you're killed, to become internally displaced peoples living in the jungle, or flee into exile to join the hundreds of thousands already fled into overcrowded refugee camps. Come with me for a moment as people have had to flee their villages, leave behind their paddy fields, their oxen, their homes, their lives, just carry what they can on that long road to nowhere. Goes on the long road to nowhere. Resting on the long road to nowhere. Crossing rivers with your baby on your back. In the rainy season, those rivers are swollen, you drown with your baby on your back. Climbing out, soaking wet. Now, it's cold in that jungle. I'm cold, and I've got a good 4-season sleeping bag. It's cold at night. This is mountain jungle. They climb out soaking wet. They can't light fires because the smoke will be seen by Burmese soldiers. They'll be killed, so they stay cold and wet. The face of anguish on the long road to nowhere. So it goes on. And this is going on now. While we sit here today, people are fleeing Kachin state on that long road to nowhere. We sometimes ask children if they can draw what they feel, because it's easier sometimes to draw than to talk about your feelings. This little one says it all. I'm very sad. But we have wonderful partners. Dose, a wonderful young Christian man, we support Dose. Now he gives 10.5 months every year living in the jungle with the IDPs who have absolutely nothing. They're just scavenging for food. They have no health care. And Dose's passion was to have a mobile medical team that would be available to the people in the jungle. He described last time I saw Dose how in the rainy season his sleeping bag is always soaking wet. So he has to get into it and it's very cold. But he wasn't complaining. He said with a big smile, but that's a good thing, because I have to be ready to run at 3 minutes' notice. I have to know exactly where I put my shoes. I have to look at the lie of the land before I crash out in my hammock to see where there's a precipice, where there's a cliff. So if I run, I know just where I'm running. And I have to hang my hammock low for 4 reasons. To be below the bullets, to be below the shell blast. It's slightly less cold, and it's less far to fall. And then with real fear in his eyes. I couldn't go in if I didn't pray. Please will you hold Dose in your hearts and please pray for him. He knows if he is captured by Burmese soldiers, he will be tortured to death. But he's a man who goes beyond his fear to his own frontier of calling to provide that amazing ministry for his people. What a privilege to give a helping hand to someone like Dose, who risks his life for 10.5 months of the year to help his people with a mobile medical team. There's another wonderful partner we have from the Chin-Hill tribes in northwest Burma. Now, the Chin-Hill tribes had a peace agreement with the Burmese government, so they're not under attack, but they're occupied. May almost worse perhaps be occupied, have Burmese soldiers in every village. You're always vulnerable to extrajudicial killings, to rape, to forced labor, to theft of land and livestock. Not allowed education beyond grade 10, not allowed healthcare, there's no clinics. Well, Sasa grew up as a young boy, seeing women die in childbirth on kitchen tables. He lost his best friend, trying to carry his best friend with a pneumonia or some viral infection 5 days across the mountains, through the jungle, across rivers. They were carrying him on a stretcher, crossing one of the swollen rivers. They slipped. They could swim to safety, but his best friend was ill and drowned. Well, Sasa had a passion, his village had a passion for him to become a doctor. A long, tough job it was. Had to go 2 weeks for secondary school, 2 weeks by boat, on foot, to Rangoon, lived between a cow and a toilet in absolute poverty, had to learn Burmese, came out as the head of the school, went back to the village. All the villagers could everything they could to sell, vegetables, chickens, eggs, walked 5 days to the border with India, to help Sasa cross the border into India, to study for his pre-clinicals, and just give him what he could to start life there. Had to learn Hindi and English, living on construction sites, learning Hindi and English, tough, tough time, came out Mr. President of the college. I met Sasa in Armenia, where he was studying medicine in his 6th language. 3 years ago, he qualified with distinctions in medicine, surgery, obstetrics, and gynecology. Immediately went back to his people. He qualified in June. By November, had gone back to his people on the Indo-Burma border, thick jungle. They gave him a bit of jungle. They cleared the jungle. And by November, this is June to November, they cleared the jungle. They built this amazing center. We're there for the opening. They'd sent messages deep inside Chin State for villages 5-7 days walk away, each to elect a guy and a girl to come and study, to become community health workers. We were there for the opening of this amazing program. Sasa had books sent up from Rangoon by boat, by horseback, by porters. That is the wonderful Dr. Sasa. And we were there a year later for the graduation of the community health workers, and 317 of them. And our medical advisor says that those community health workers will save the lives of 8 out of 10 people in their villages who would previously have died. And right now they're training another 200, and they're hoping to expand it to another 400 community health workers for more villages deep inside Chin State. What an incredible mustard seed people they are. You give them so little money, and this is what they do with it. This is what's so wonderful, working with passionate local partners. But back on the eastern side of Burma, hundreds of thousands of Karen, Karenni, and Shan people have, as I said, had to flee into Thailand, where they live in overcrowded camps, unable to grow crops, keep animals, or enjoy freedom. This is one of those camps. I took this picture earlier this year. And when we were in Chiang Mai, about to leave this area, we got a message that from the camp next to this one, see how overcrowded it is. Someone on a Saturday night knocked over their cooking stove and set the hut alight. The fire ran like wildfire through that overcrowded camp. That night, 7,000 people lost their homes and such meager possessions as they had, and the rainy season was imminent. I took this picture, and I love it. I took this picture early this year. It's a poignant picture, of course. The little lad trapped in one of those camps, who knows what his future is, but still smiling. I'm sure you find, as we do, that in these tough, tough parts of the world, people still smile. They keep an indomitable faith and hope. Makes me feel very humble. And if you have heard me speak before, I'm sure I've introduced you to Pastor Simon. He's a wonderful Christian theologian. He lives in that overcrowded camp, and he's turned that place of limitation and what might have been despair into a place of hope and healing. They are worshipping in their traditional Karen costumes on a Sunday morning, beautiful music, worshipping with such joy. And Pastor Simon's living testimony, you may have heard, as we read it, just celebrate their indomitable faith, their hope, and their values, which see things not in terms of this world. And remember that this lovely living testimony by Pastor Simon is written in English, his fifth language. He'll speak Karen, Thai, Burmese, and Indian dialect. Listen to his wonderful use of our language. They call us a displaced people, but thank God we're not misplaced. They say they see no hope for our future, but thank God our future is as bright as the promises of God. They say the life of our people is a misery, but praise God, our life is a mystery. For what they say is what they see, and what they see is temporal. But ours is the eternal, all because we put ourselves in the hands of the God we trust. Isn't that wonderful? If you want a copy of that wonderful text, it is in one of the books. My newest book I've just brought out with Ben Rogers is The Very Stones Cry Out. And it's the story of the persecuted church in many different countries. But what I love as I was writing that book, I was born actually in Orissa. And if you come to my session this afternoon, we're going to other places. Orissa in India will be one of the places visited this afternoon. But I was walking through yet another ruined, burnt-out, destroyed church in Orissa in India. And I was sort of scrabbling over the crumbled bricks, the rubble, the splintered glass, the burnt wood, the torn Bibles. And I thought, I've just done this too often. Too many churches I've gone through like this. No other faith tradition in the world today has suffered such widespread, often systematic destruction of its holy places. And the phrase came, the very stones will cry out. And the book was born there. And then since then, of course, I've visited many more churches, sadly, which have been destroyed. But the lesson that came through as I was working on that book, yes, the stones do cry out, but they cry out with worship. You go to those ruined churches, and people will be worshipping, and they'll be worshipping with such joy, often in much more joy than we, I'm sure your own church is excluded from this generalization, than we in the comfortable West. But it is so humbling. So the stones cry out, but they cry out with worship. And not only does the church survive, as we all know, and those who come from the parts of the world where the church is persecuted, the church grows under persecution, and the church loves. We never get a message of revenge or retribution. We get message after message of love. And those wonderful stories are in that book, because I just thought we ought to celebrate the vibrancy and the love and the faith of our persecuted brothers and sisters whose churches are ruined, but where the stones cry out with worship. Just very briefly, the recent developments I'm sure you may have followed in some of the media may be cause for cautious optimism. The famous Nobel laureate democracy leader Aung San Suu Kyi has been freed. She's able to participate in political activity. There has been release of over 600 political prisoners, and one dam, which would have flooded a whole lot of people in the ethnic minority areas, has been postponed. But causes for continuing concern and prayer, please. Conflict and atrocities in Kachin State continue, as I mentioned. The breakdown of the ceasefire in Shan State, when I was across the border there, the ceasefire was broken 2 days before we got there. The military commander of the camp we stayed in said, if you'd been here just a few hours earlier, you would have heard the mortars and the shelling. It was a bitter battle. And he said, in very graphic terms, he said, when things got better in Rangoon and Hillary Clinton visited and William Hague has visited, everyone went to Rangoon and nobody stopped to look at us, still in the darkness. Please pray for the ethnic nationals still in the darkness. And pray for their particular fear that increased investment and aid in the Burmese government in Rangoon may result, their great fear, in greater exploitation and plundering of their resource-rich lands. This afternoon we'll be going back to Shan State, a little more of a feeling of the situation there. But seatbelts on and no jet lag, off to Sudan. As many of you know, I love Sudan. I've worked there for many, many years, originally as a nurse in what was then northern Sudan, in an immunization program in remote area desert work in the mid-80s. Since then, the situation got very, very horrendous. An Islamist military regime, National Islamic Front, took power by military coup in 1989, immediately declared Islamic military jihad against all who oppose it. And that included many of the moderate Muslims, as well as the Christians and the traditional believers. Every month, Khartoum would publish a list of the airstrips which were open to UN Operation Lifeline Sudan and all the big legit organizations, and the forbidden areas. And of course, it would carry out its military offensives in the forbidden areas so no one could take aid to the victims or tell the world what it was doing. Well, I went 30 times to those forbidden areas, and Khartoum did not love me very much. They gave me a prison sentence for illegal entry. Thank you for having a convict in your midst, very inclusive. I'm serving that sentence in absentia. Khartoum still does not love me very much because I still continue to tell the truth it doesn't want the world to hear. But this is a particularly revealing picture, and some of you may have seen it before, but I will show it again for two reasons. One is because it is a rebuke to me, and also shows how God is a very good photographer. I've been in one of those no-go airstrips on one of my visits. Khartoum had also warned me it would shoot our planes out of the sky if we tried to go to the forbidden areas. Well, we did have brave pilots who would give a false destination, and we'd fly around in the circle of the legitimate aircraft, and at the last minute snuck down to the forbidden airstrip. The plane couldn't stay on the ground, it would certainly be bombed. So we used to pile out very quickly, had the great privilege of spending several days with the local people. And then, I must confess, I was always just a little bit relieved when I saw that plane come to take me back to my safety zone and my comfort zone. All the things we take for granted, the luxury of this, what you give for this in a remote part of South Sudan in a war zone. And I was saying in a moment, many people are now dying for lack of water. Come to that in just a moment. But in a fit of complete self-indulgence, I was taking a photo of this plane coming to take me back to all these good things of this life. The boy with the cross was not in the picture frame as I lined my camera up. And I did, in those days, as you know, you remember the old ways of actually developing old sort of negatives. As I developed that negative, the boy with the picture frame was there. And I think God put him there as a rebuke to me. When I'm thinking of my comfort zone and my safety, our brothers and sisters are still enduring their Gethsemanes and their Calvaries on that front line of faith and freedom. Thank you, God. And just a few pictures from those days. A young woman with a blindness that could have been treated or prevented. A little lad dying of starvation. And I always show this picture. It's emblematic, but I could repeat it hundreds of times over. That young mum said to me, I could go to a government-held area and get food, clothes, medicine. But I know if I do, I'm going to have to convert to Islam, because Islamic aid is conditional. That I will never do. We would rather live and die as Christians. A tough call for yourself, to sacrifice your child. I'm blessed with 10 grandchildren. I can hardly imagine the anguish of sacrificing a child for your faith. But if you talk to the southern Sudanese diaspora, they will tell you this was standard practice, and so many chose death rather than aid. The killing fields, the scorched earth policy, every time we landed at a little remote airstrip, people emaciated would come running up and saying, "Thank you for being here, come footing with us and see what the enemy's done." So again and again we would go footing through the scorched earth policy, the destroyed cattle, I won't show you the human corpses, and the burnt, scorched earth policy. The first picture was in Bahr Ghazal to the west of South Sudan. This is southern Blue Nile to the east, a whole belt of wiped out lands and homes. Little boy and all that remains of his church. As I'm sure you all know, a peace agreement was signed in 2005, which brought some peace for South Sudan, a referendum of independence, and celebration of the birth of the new nation on July the 9th last year. I had the privilege of being there as a guest of the government. But it was a time, and still is, of the glory and the grey. South Sudan's celebrations of independence were very real, but wars continue, humanitarian crises abound. Look at this lady's lovely smile. They'll always smile. Her hand, leprosy. Khartoum denies leprosy. Well, here it is. What a privilege to hold that lady's hand. And I happen to be a third order Franciscan, and I'm always reminded of this saying of St. Francis: pity weeps and turns away. Compassion weeps, puts out a hand to help. We can all weep and turn away. What a privilege to put out a hand to help. Bishop Moses Deng of the Anglican Diocese of Wau in Bahr Ghazal is one of our partners in South Sudan. Wonderful guy, of such integrity, vision, dedication, love for his people, but his people are in desperate need. Priorities in South Sudan include urgent relief for refugees, come to that in just a moment, refugees who fled from the conflict in Abyei, the Nuba Mountains and Blue Nile, and so-called returnees, the people with southern connections who are being expelled in their tens of thousands from what is now the new Republic of Sudan in the north. Education, healthcare, and orphans. Just a few quick examples. Education, a priority need. A lost generation of kids who could never go to school because of constant bombardment. 2 little lads yearning for school, looking at all that remains of what had been their school. But one of the lovely things about Hart, and I'm sure you have it in the same, we have lots of volunteers, people who get the DNA of what it's all about, and who volunteer and go out onto those front lines and work with the local people. Naomi was a teacher at one of our prestigious private schools. She came with us on one of our visits up to Bahr Ghazal. She fell in love with the place. She won an award and is now helping to develop a teacher training program up in this remote part of Bahr Ghazal. She works with Bishop Moses Deng. I can tell you who Naomi is. She's obviously not the Dinka. And she's a plucky young girl, because out there it is Bronze Age existence. There's no electricity, there's no running water, but they've helped establish this school. And as I'm sure you're all aware, it's often more difficult to get local communities to send girls to school as it is to send boys. So they set up this school, which is called Marral Academy, and they call it a girls' school, which boys may attend. So the girls all go, as you see, and the boys do too. And here they are welcoming us at the airstrip. You see the plane in the background, and with a lovely band, with a flag of new Republic of South Sudan, and the girls are there, proud of their uniforms. But there is, good friends, an urgent need for Christian mission. The bishops down there in South Sudan have in their possession a very challenging document, the proposals for the Islamization of South Sudan. Everything is set out: schools, teacher training colleges, books, hospitals, clinics, nurses' uniforms, $29 million US. That budget was sent to Saudi Arabia and to Libya when Gaddafi was still there for the conversion through aid. That money is pouring into South Sudan. And our brothers and sisters are there saying, where is Christian mission? Dawa Islamia means conversion, is everywhere. Does everyone have to decide whether they're going to go to an Islamic clinic and convert to Islam or let their child die of malaria? Where is Christian mission? One of the things I love about being with you is you are part of the answer to that creed occur. But it is urgent, it's imminent, and it's large scale. The new Republic of South Sudan, celebrating freedom and independence. The day before the great day of the recognition of independence, the countdown clock. the moment when the flag of the world's newest nation was raised, the flag of South Sudan, a day of great celebration, the formal and the informal. They knew they had problems. They said, well, at least we can look at our problems and address them as a free nation. Well, the problems are legion. Wars and tragedies of war continue in South Kordofan, the Nuba Mountains, Abyei, and Blue Nile. The Khartoum government, while we sit here today, is bombing civilians and denying access by aid organizations, the victims of war, and a catastrophic famine, well, is looming. It's actually happening, beginning to unroll right now. Nuba Mountains, constant aerial bombardment in the Nuba Mountains. One of our partnerships in the Nuba Mountains is with widows. And we had a lovely program for widows, helping them with economic independence and develop their self-confidence. They are all now, I'm afraid, hiding in caves as the constant bombardment with Antonov bombers, with helicopter gunships, with MiGs, and with long-range missiles is pounding down on the Nuba Mountains. And in Blue Nile, they don't even have caves to hide in, just trying to hide in the forests. And in those caves, there are deadly snakes. But they say we're more afraid of the bombs than of the snakes. This is their life now, what they have to resort to, hiding in caves. Still smile, that little one's smile, but life is grim in those caves. And now the rainy season is in. They were not able, because of the constant bombardment, to plant or to harvest their crops. There's a massive food shortage there in the Nuba Mountains, and the casualties are recent and tragic. Figures, just very briefly, mind-blowing figures. With Khartoum's constant air bombardment of civilians in the Nuba Mountains and Blue Nile, 500,000 are displaced and hiding in those caves and forests, and 250,000 have fled as refugees into an already wiped-out, devastated South Sudan. Khartoum is also expelling those whom it deems southerners from the Republic of Sudan. President al-Bashir in Khartoum, who is indicted by the International Criminal Court, has said he wants to turn the new Republic of Sudan, that's the old north, into a unified Arabic Islamic Republic. And they are driving out Christians and southerners. And when he visited Kurmuk, a town in Sudan, he said, I don't even want to see a bit of black plastic here. It is arrant, horrendous, barbaric racism. And the international community is silent. Thousands, tens of thousands have had to flee from the Republic of Sudan. They're living now in dire conditions in camps across the border in South Sudan. With the imminent rainy season, it's beginning right now, there is beginning a humanitarian catastrophe. I dread opening my emails in the morning back in London now. The reports coming in every day of thousands dying. I took this picture just about a month ago. That flimsy little dwelling is for a family who'd had to leave their home in Khartoum. They'd left a home and all their belongings, just carry with them what they could. Look at that flimsy little dwelling and the 2 pathetic suitcases. That's a tiny bit of shelter from the sun in the dry season. When the rainy season is now beginning, that will just be nothing. And they'll be living in a quagmire and dying. More pathetic pictures, these are the so-called returnees from Khartoum at Renk, just bringing what they could, and no shelter, and water and food are running out. Please pray for these people. They're in their hundreds of thousands. Took this picture. This is the camp of Yida, where people have had to flee from the Nuba Mountains from that constant bombardment there. They arrive hungry, and now with the rainy season, they're going to be dying of famine because access by aid organizations will not be possible. A young mum, she's lost a limb, and it was very difficult walking 5 days from the Nuba Mountains with her baby to get to this camp. But they still laugh and smile. This picture was taken just a month ago. Nuba Mountain people, they remembered I'd been there during the war, and in spite of all the suffering and all the catastrophe that was looming, they still welcomed us with tremendous smiles and dance. It breaks my heart. And as we leave Sudan for the moment, we return this afternoon, but the traditional Nuba Mountain costumes, the traditional Nuba Mountain customs, trying to be kept alive in exile in the camp at Yida. So as we leave Sudan, please pray. 2 little faces, despair or hope. South Sudan could flourish. It has huge potential resources, but at the moment Khartoum is doing everything it can to destabilize that new republic, which is vulnerable, and to inundate it with refugees, with returnees, in a way that it cannot in any way help them. Please, this must be a priority area for your help. Very briefly, Nigeria. Much of Nigeria, relatively peaceful and prosperous, but I'm sure many of you here know, northern Nigeria and Plateau State, Central Belt, have suffered a great deal of persecution and attacks. The village of Doganahawa, a couple of years ago, that was attacked one night. 450 Christians were wiped out in one night alone. Kids obviously suffering from post-traumatic stress. The mass grave where their parents, their siblings, their friends are buried. Machete wounds, those who managed to escape. This is last year, the Anglican Bishop of Bauchi in Bauchi State. Now, Bauchi is one of the Sharia states. There are 12 states in Nigeria which are now dominated by Sharia law, where life is very difficult for Christians. Anglican Bishop of Bauchi, a lot of his churches in his diocese were destroyed in post-election violence last year. An invitation, you see the church there, the Anglican Church. Invitation to an event, you can see the date, 19th of June 2011, St. Joseph's Church, an event which would never be able to take place as planned because of the persecution and destruction. But such good things happening. It's our great privilege to partner with and support the Christian Institute in Jos, Archbishop Ben Quash's vision and dream, and they do wonderful things, train men and women for leadership and ministry, maternal and child health, still smiling. I'm sure you know there have been a lot of killings already in Jos and other parts of northern Nigeria this year. They could be dead tomorrow. They still smile. Deaconess Susan, I love Deaconess Susan. She is the dean of the Institute, and she is a lady who lives by faith. They didn't have a library. Didn't have any books either, for that matter. But she said an institute must have a library. So they built a library. No books, they built a library. They built bookshelves. No books, but they built bookshelves. The next day, a huge consignment of books arrived from the United States, thank you so much, and the library was ready to receive them. One of these sayings from our Egyptian Coptic Christian friends, which I love, is, God loves to fill empty coffers. Well, our friends there live with empty coffers, and God does fill them. And in Hart, when we're overspending massively, as we do all the time, we're a tiny NGO. We've got 25% of Hart UK standing here and all of Hart US sitting here. But when we overspend, I just remind myself, God loves to fill empty coffers. Please, God, our coffers are pretty empty. But they are doing wonderful work. We're also hoping to support an Anglican school, St. Andrew's, outside Jos, dynamic head teacher, sophisticated, simple teaching aids, too sophisticated for me to understand. Perhaps someone could give me a tutorial afterwards. But wonderful teaching. And the kids so proud of their uniform, their school. And the Anglican Bishop of Bari in Kano State, which is a Sharia state, is a dynamic guy. Now, Bari, a rural area, Christians totally discriminated against, couldn't get jobs, employment, healthcare, or education, and because they couldn't get employment, they couldn't buy those services. In the middle of the village in Bari, he's building a brick-making little outfit, which makes bricks, and he used those bricks to build school. Here's the school. And, you know, it doesn't cost much to pay the teachers. It's about £500, $800 a year to pay for a teacher. When we first went to Bari, there was only one teacher and 8 kids. Now there are 8 teachers and over 250 kids in the school. And they have good education. Their first language is Hausa. Here they are learning good English grammar, better than some of the English grammar we teach back in Britain, I'm afraid to say. And poignant gratitude. And here's the clinic. Now, I say there was no medical care available for the Christian community, but the bishop has built this clinic. It's been Hart's great privilege to support this clinic. And one of the things that we never ever do in Hart, we never call things that we sponsor Hart. You won't see Hart on any building. I personally don't like it when you see foreign names on buildings. It means it's not their own building. We let them call it what they want to call it. So you don't see Hart written all over it. But that building will now be able to provide medical care for the local community who previously had none, or you had to sell your last pair of trousers or your last goat to get some treatment. It will also serve the Muslim community, because Christian love and aid must be unconditional. And that's part of the witness of the Bishop of Bari. And of course, Archbishop Ben. and his lovely wife, Gloria. Gloria, as I'm sure you know, has suffered so much. And she is one of my heroines. Whenever there's an attack on a village in Plateau State, people have lost everything, Gloria will get together a rackety-packety old bus, fill it with clothes and cooking pots with other members of the Mothers' Union, see the Mothers' Union clothes, and drive down into the epicenter of violence, rainy season and all, and be with her people. My nickname for her is Gloria in Excelsis. She is a very special lady. I'm sure all of you here know the terrible thing that happened some years ago now, but I would just remind us how important it is to keep our brothers and sisters in our prayers. I had one of the worst emails in my life, must be about 4 or 5 years ago now, and militants had gone to the bishop's home to kill him. He wasn't there, he was away. They beat up one of his sons, and my beloved friend Gloria, they took her, and I'm sure you know this story, they gang raped her. They violated her with broken glass and splintered wood, and they trampled on her so hard that she was blinded. Thank you to you in the United States. She subsequently had her sight restored here in the United States. And this has taken since then. Her glorious smile is back. But of course, the bishop immediately went home, and one of the emails, 24 hours after he was back, read like this. I've now been home for 24 hours. I've had time to sit, think, and pray, and I've had a good laugh. Because I remember when I was a little boy, my mum used to pray so hard that I'd be a Christian. And I know now when churches in Nigeria get into trouble, churches in the West pray for us. And it's good for churches in the West to have to pray, so maybe we should get into trouble more often. Then he turned serious. He said, I've just come back from the hospital. My beloved Gloria was able to sit to receive Holy Communion. And we had a wonderful time of prayer and praise and worship together. And we just thanked God. We'd been found worthy to suffer for his kingdom. And we prayed that all of Gloria's pain, anguish, and humiliation would be used for his kingdom, his glory, and the strengthening of his church. That spirituality makes me feel microscopic in mine. You may know that since then, militants have gone back. Archbishop Ben very kindly spoke at my 70th birthday party a few years ago now. And just within 3 weeks of speaking at that party in London, militants came back to his home. He was there at that time. They took him out to execute him. Then they decided they'd execute him in front of his family. They took him back into the house. He was lying, and then he lay prostrate, praying, waiting to be killed. The last minute, they decided, well, we won't do it this time. And they ransacked the house and left. Our brothers and sisters out there could be dead tomorrow. 2 churches have already been blown up or attacked this year in Jos, one Roman Catholic church and one Kokin church. The Roman Catholic Church were mercifully protected because the big truck full of explosives couldn't get through the gates into the kind of enclosure around the church, and so it exploded outside. People were still killed, but if it exploded inside, it would have been mass carnage. This could happen. I get regular emails. I ask them from Deaconess Susan regularly, how are things last Sunday? And she said, no, going to church here is very different from going to church in England or America. We never know if we're going to be alive at the end of the service. Please do remember our brothers and sisters when you go to your churches on Sunday mornings. And Archbishop Ben gave us this challenge when we were with him last year, or 2 years ago. If we have a faith worth living for, it's a faith worth dying for. Don't you, that's us, compromise the faith we are living and dying for. My friends, we are, in Britain, compromising that faith. We already have 65, at least, Sharia courts and councils in the United Kingdom. Women are really suffering as a result of gender discrimination in Sharia courts and councils. One Muslim woman said to me, I came to Britain to get away from all this, and I feel betrayed. It's worse here than it was in my home country. I'm introducing a private member's bill into the British Parliament to try to deal with gender discrimination, particularly related to Sharia law and its implementation in the United Kingdom. But please, may we not compromise the faith we are living and dying for. There was another paragraph which my computer froze as I said this morning, but I was going to add, but I'll just verbalize it. He went on after saying this. He said, if you don't fight these issues now, your grandchildren are going to have to fight the battles you have not had the courage to fight. Please maybe learn from our brothers and sisters on those front lines who are fighting those battles now, and not leave it to our grandchildren to uphold the faith in our own lands. As we leave Nigeria, one of the little girls in our school, understandably apprehensive, but a happier picture. I'd like to see all the children in Nigeria have a little more confident smile, but please pray for them. And our final destination is northern Uganda. Northern Uganda, as I'm sure many of you know, suffered many years from the Lord's Resistance Army, the rebel army which terrorized the area for 20 years, displaced more than 1.5 million people, killed and maimed innocent civilians, and one of the most horrible things, abducted at least 25,000 children, probably more, brutalized them, and forced them to become child soldiers. Well, that's a story for another day, but we went out there when the LRA was active. Most aid organizations had pulled out for security reasons, understandably. But a red light for them is a green light for us. When you're as old as me, you've got less of natural life left to lose. You can afford to go to those areas. And we went and we asked, and we said, what's your priority? Well, as a result of war and displacement, there are so many orphans who are vulnerable to neglect and starvation. There's no one to look after other people's orphans. So we said we could help. They gave the land, they made the bricks, they'll always give so much. They've set up this wonderful centre, not called Hart, Parawina. These little kids came in emaciated, dying, malnourished. Here they are, 2.5 years later, healthy, robust little kids dancing their traditional African dances, singing their traditional African songs. And I love this picture, graduating from pre-primary. What a privilege to be able to help them, help the local people to give them that start in life. The centre is now growing in many ways. 2 little lads who probably wouldn't have been alive had not been our privilege to be there. But young Josephine is one of our young ladies. She is HIV positive, and there is so much HIV out there. So the centre is now changing its focus into becoming a centre for holistic care for HIV positive children and their carers. And I love this picture. I wish every child in the world could have that look of love and hope and trust and joy. She's one of our little ladies in that home in Patongo in northern Uganda. So as I conclude, I'd like to pay tribute to our partners. It's always the partners who magnify this little support we can give them. We're tiny. But they multiply that support in ways beyond anything we can ever imagine. They are true miracle workers, people of the mustard seed. Their priorities, when we ask them, what are your priorities, which I think they need some help with too, they do appreciate having the dignity of choice. One of the leaders in South Sudan said to us last year, why do so many aid organizations just come and tell us what they're going to do? Why don't they ask? We know our priorities. I know you ask, so I celebrate that. But they do need help with meeting Western donors' criteria of accountability. You know, I really get so fed up with the big donors and the things they ask you to do to account for what they give you. One of our lovely bishops, when we asked if he could produce a few accounts, he's a lovely, big, dynamic guy. He just crumbled into tears. And he said, well, I don't know what to do with the spreadsheet. Well, why should he know what to do with the spreadsheet? We must help our partners to have some assistance so that they do know what to do with spreadsheets. So if they do apply or they're offered other aid, we can help them to meet the criteria of Western donors, much as I dislike most of those criteria. And also to help them with advocacy, to help them with the processes, I say, of accountability and effective advocacy. Well, as I say, we admire and respect them as mustard seed people. They multiply the little we give them in ways beyond anything we can ever imagine. And I should never forget Bishop Moses Deng, just very briefly as I conclude, a tribute to honesty and integrity. He sent out an urgent request for people who've been expelled from Sudan into South Sudan, were living in terrible camps. We'll revisit that this afternoon. But they were dying with no food. He sent an SOS to us. Well, we're tiny, but we sent 10,000 UK, well, $15,000, $16,000, and another lot later. And he said that did help quite a lot of people. And when we went out to visit, because we visit regularly, he said, rather sheepishly sitting down, he said, no, the second lot of £10,000 you sent, we didn't actually need to use all of it for food relief because the sorghum harvest kicked in a bit quicker. We were able to provide sorghum. Would you like me to give the money back? Well, isn't that moving? And then he said, but if you wouldn't mind, if I could keep it, what I'd love to do would be to use it to buy some land, some seeds, some tools for some of those people so they can grow their own food and not rely on food aid next year? Well, it's obvious what our answer was. I wish we could multiply our own resources 100-fold. But that's the kind of integrity of our marvellous mustard seed people. Their honesty, their integrity, their resourcefulness, and their resilience. What a privilege it is to be able to give them a helping hand. And as I finish, this is our motto in Hart. Now, sometimes when you look around the world, the needs are so legion, you don't know where to begin. So maybe you don't begin. Now, I know you do begin and you do wonderful things here. I love and celebrate that. But what we often say to people who are not quite sure is, okay, I cannot do everything, but I must not do nothing. And if together we all do something, we really can make a difference. So thank you for giving me the great privilege of sharing a little bit of the pain and the passion of making that difference on some of our wonderful partners on front lines of faith and freedom around the world today. May God bless you in your endeavours, and thank you for letting me be a part of them. God bless.